My best friend asked me to help him pick out a ring for another man, and I said yes before I let myself think about why my hands were shaking. That's how this actually starts, if I'm being honest, not with some big dramatic moment, but with me standing in a jewelry store on a Tuesday afternoon, holding a velvet tray of rings that weren't for me, smiling at my best friend like my chest wasn't doing something complicated and unwelcome. His name is Callum. We've known each other for 11 years, since college, since a mandatory dorm meeting where we got seated alphabetically and ended up next to each other because Rays and Row are close enough in the alphabet to ruin your life, apparently. He was loud and a little too confident and made a joke about the Raw's PowerPoint that got us both glared at, and by the end of that meeting we'd exchanged numbers, and by the end of that semester he was the person I called when anything happened, good or bad. I need to back up further than that though, because you won't understand why the ring shop mattered so much unless you understood where I was standing in my own life. 14 months before that Tuesday, my husband Andre left. Not dramatically, there wasn't another man standing in the doorway or a screaming fight, nothing you could point to and say, there, that's the moment. It was slower and somehow worse than that. He just got quieter over about a year, and then one night he sat across from me at our kitchen table and said he didn't think he loved me the way a person should love someone they married, and that staying would just be us being polite to each other for the next 40 years. He wasn't cruel about it. That was almost the hardest part. I couldn't even be angry at him properly because he didn't do anything wrong, he just stopped wanting to be there, and there's no clean way to be furious at someone for a feeling they didn't choose to lose. After the divorce, I told everyone, including myself, that I was done. Not in a self-pitying way, or not only in a self-pitying way, I said it like a decision, like a fact I'd settled on. I'm not doing that again. I'm not opening that door again. People nodded like they understood, and mostly they let it go except Callum, who never quite let anything go, who showed up at my apartment 3 times a week with takeout and bad reality TV, and didn't ask me to talk unless I wanted to. He was the reason I got through that year, honestly. Not in a rescuing, dramatic way. In the boring, essential way someone remembering you exists on the nights you forget to remember it yourself. So you'd think, given all that, I would have noticed something changing in how I felt about him. I didn't. Or I did, and I filed it under gratitude, under this is just what a good friendship feels like, because it was easier than the alternative. Callum had been seeing a guy named Ezra for about 8 months by the time the ring conversation happened. Ezra worked in finance, was tall, had the kind of easy handsomeness that makes you feel slightly worse about yourself standing next to him, and was, by every account including my own observation, perfectly nice. Not exciting, not unkind. Nice in the way oatmeal is nice. I think I'm going to propose, Callum told me over dinner one night, a random Wednesday, no lead-up, the way he announced most big things in his life, like ripping off a bandage before he could think better of it. I remember exactly what I was doing, twirling pasta I had no intention of eating around my fork, and I remember the sound stopping in the restaurant for me for a second, like someone had turned the volume down on everything except that sentence. Oh, I said just that, oh. Yeah, he was watching my face carefully, which he did sometimes, like he was checking something. It feels like the right time. He's good for me, right? You think he's good for me? I think he's good for you, I said, and it was true technically, and it still felt like lying. So you'll help me pick something out? You have better taste than me. You'll tell me if I'm about to buy something hideous. Yeah, I said, of course. I want to be clear that at that moment I didn't think, oh, I'm in love with my best friend. That thought didn't arrive neatly packaged with a bow on it. What arrived was smaller and stranger, just this hollow drop in my stomach that I told myself was leftover sadness from the divorce, some general allergic reaction to the word propose that had nothing to do with who was doing the proposing. I was wrong about that, obviously. It just took me a while to stop being wrong about it on purpose. The ring shopping happened 2 weeks later. I stood there under 2 bright lights while a saleswoman with excellent patience walked us through rows of rings, and Callum kept turning to me, is this too plain, is this too much, would you wear this? And every single time he asked, would you wear this, some small, stupid, hopeful part of my brain answered a question he hadn't actually asked. This one, I said finally, pointing at a simple brushed gold band because I needed the moment to be over and because it genuinely did suit him, understated the way he wasn't in any other part of his life. He'll like this. Callum held it up to the light. Yeah, he said, softer than I expected. Yeah, okay. Then he looked at me and for a second, just a second, something crossed his face that I couldn't name, some flicker of uncertainty that didn't match a guy who was about to buy an engagement ring for the man he loved. "You okay?" I asked. "Yeah," he said too quickly, "just nervous, I guess." I let it go. I've thought about that moment more times than I can count since, wondering what would have happened if I'd pushed instead of letting it go. He didn't propose that week or the week after. He kept the ring in his sock drawer. He told me this later, laughing about it in the way people laugh about things that actually terrified them, for almost 2 months waiting for the right moment that never quite arrived. I didn't think much of the delay at the time. I was busy pretending I was fine, which was taking up most of my available energy. My sister Priya was the one who said it out loud first, the way sisters do, without asking permission. "You've been weird about Callum's engagement," she said, over the phone, in the middle of a completely unrelated conversation about our mom's birthday plans, like she'd just been saving the observation for the right pause. "I haven't been weird. You changed the subject 3 times when I brought up the ring." "I didn't count." "I counted," she said. "Look, I'm not trying to start anything. You get quiet in a specific way when something's actually bothering you, and you've had that specific quiet for like 2 months, and it started right around when he told you he was proposing. That's all I'm saying. He's my best friend, I'm happy for him." Yeah. "You can be happy for someone and also have feelings about it, Sam. Those aren't opposites." I didn't say anything for a second. "I'm not saying you're in love with him," she added, gentler now. "I'm saying you should figure out what you actually feel before you spend the next however many years standing next to him at every important moment of his life pretending you feel nothing." I hung up, annoyed at her, which is usually a good sign she's right about something. I didn't figure it out that week or the next. I kept doing what I'd been doing, which was showing up, being the good best friend, laughing at the right moments, helping plan a bachelor party for a wedding that hadn't officially happened yet because Callum still hadn't proposed and wouldn't say why. Things changed on a night I wasn't expecting anything to change. Callum showed up at my apartment unannounced, which wasn't unusual, except this time he had a bottle of wine and a face that told me the evening wasn't going to be about takeout and reality TV. "Ezra and I got into a fight," he said, sitting down heavily on my couch like his legs had made the decision without asking him. "About?" "About the ring. He found it. In my drawer. 2 months, Sam. He found an engagement ring that's been sitting in my sock drawer for 2 months, and he asked me why I hadn't proposed yet if I bought it, and I didn't have a good answer." "What did you tell him?" "I told him I was waiting for the right moment." Callum poured 2 glasses of wine without asking if I wanted one, which told me how rattled he was. He asked me what a right moment even looks like if 2 months of moments haven't been right, and I didn't have an answer for that either, and he could tell I didn't, and that was almost worse than if I'd just said something. "Do you know why you've been waiting?" I asked carefully, because some part of me already suspected the shape of the answer and didn't want to hear it confirmed, and also desperately did. Callum was quiet for a long time, turning his wine glass slowly by the stem. "I keep telling myself it's nerves," he said. "That's what I told Ezra, but nerves don't usually feel like relief every time I find an excuse to put it off. That's not what nerves are supposed to feel like, right?" "I don't know," I said. "I've only been married once and it didn't end well, so maybe don't take my word on what nerves should feel like." He almost laughed, but it came out crooked, unfinished. "Sorry, that was a stupid thing to bring up in front of you of all people." "It's fine." "Is it?" He looked at me properly then, the way he did sometimes, like he was reading something off my face that I hadn't said out loud. "You've been different since ring shopping. I noticed. I didn't want to say anything because I thought maybe I was imagining it or maybe it was still about Andre, but—" "Callum, I need to say this while I have the nerve to say it," he said, and his voice had gone quieter, less certain than I'd ever heard it. "Because I think I've been putting off proposing to Ezra for a reason I haven't let myself look at directly, and I think the reason has something to do with you, and I don't know what to do with that, and I need you to tell me if I'm losing my mind." The apartment went very still. I could hear the refrigerator humming, which is a strange thing to notice at a moment like that, but I noticed it because it was easier than looking directly at what he'd just said. "You're not losing your mind," I said finally. "So you feel it too?" "I don't know what I feel," I said, which was true and also a kind of cowardice. "I know I've been jealous in a way I've been calling something else for 2 months. I know that when you asked me if this ring suited you, some part of me wanted to say no just so the whole thing would stop moving forward. I know that's a horrible thing to admit about your best friend's engagement. It's not horrible, Callum said. It's honest. I've been doing the same thing. I picked that ring because you said you liked it, not because I thought Ezra would. Do you understand how messed up that is? I was buying a ring for one man based on what would make another man happy. I didn't know what to say to that. Some part of me wanted to reach for him and some part of me wanted to run out of my own apartment, and I ended up doing neither, just sitting there with my wine going warm in my hand. I'm not saying this to blow up your engagement, I said eventually. I don't want to be the reason you don't marry someone. I can't carry that. You're not the reason, Callum said. I am. I'm the reason. I've been the reason for months. I just didn't want to say it because saying it means admitting I've been unfair to Ezra and unfair to you by not being honest with either of you. He left that night without either of us resolving anything, which felt unbearable at the time but which I understand now was the right thing. Some conversations aren't supposed to end in a bow. They're supposed to end in two people going home to sit with something uncomfortable until it's ready to become something clearer. He broke off the engagement with Ezra 9 days later. I know the exact number because I counted every one of them, terrified he'd change his mind, terrified he wouldn't, terrified of both outcomes in equal, exhausting measure. He told me about it over the phone, his voice rough in a way that told me it had been a hard conversation on both ends. He asked me if it was about you, Callum said. Ezra did, straight out. And I told him the truth, which is that it's about me not being honest with myself for longer than I should have been, and that you were part of that honesty, but that this isn't your fault and it isn't really even about you loving me back or not. It's about me not being able to marry someone while I'm still figuring out what I feel for someone else. How did he take that? About how you'd expect. He's allowed to be angry, I would be too, Callum exhaled slowly. He said something before he left that I haven't been able to stop thinking about. He said, I always knew you loved him more than you loved me, I just didn't think you knew it yet. I didn't say anything because there wasn't anything good to say. It was true and it was devastating, and both things could be true at once. I'm not calling to ask you for anything, Callum said after a silence that went on long enough to become its own kind of statement. I need you to know that. I broke it off because staying in it while feeling what I feel for you would have been worse for Ezra, not because I expect you to suddenly be ready for something with me. I know you swore off all of this. I remember you saying it more than once. I'm not trying to undo that promise for you. I know, I said. I just needed to stop lying to everyone, including myself. That's all this is right now. We didn't see each other for almost 3 weeks after that call, which had never happened in 11 years of friendship, not even during the worst stretch of my divorce. I told myself it was mutual, that we both needed space, and that was partly true, but mostly I think we were both scared of what would happen if we were in the same room with all of that sitting between us, unresolved and enormous. I spent those 3 weeks doing something I hadn't done in over a year, which was actually thinking, instead of just surviving one day into the next. I thought about Andre, about the specific shape of the loss that came from being left by someone I'd built a whole life around. I thought about the promise I'd made to myself in the ugliest part of that grief, I'm not doing this again, and I tried to figure out if that promise had ever really been about protecting myself, or if it had just been fear wearing the costume of self-respect. I called Priya because apparently that's what I do now when I can't figure myself out. You're scared, she said without much preamble once I'd laid the whole thing out. That's it, that's the whole thing, you're not scared of Callum. You're scared that if it goes wrong with him you lose the divorce version of a person too. You don't just lose a boyfriend, you lose your best friend, the person who got you through the worst year of your life. That's a bigger risk than anything you had with Andre because Andre wasn't holding you together when things fell apart. Callum is the person who does that. So if this breaks, you're not just losing a relationship, you're losing your safety net. That's a horrifying way to put it. I'm not saying it to scare you more, I'm saying it because I think once you understand what you're actually afraid of, you can decide if it's worth being afraid of it anyway. I sat with that for a long time after we hung up. The thing that finally moved me wasn't some grand realization. It was small and almost embarrassing. I was at the grocery store alone on a random Sunday, standing in the cereal aisle, and I picked up the specific weird cereal Callum liked, the one with too much sugar that he ate like a college freshman even though he's 32, and I put it in my cart without thinking, the way you do things out of habit for someone you've built a life around. And then I stood there, staring at the box, and thought, I have been building a life around this man for 11 years and calling it friendship because it was safer than calling it what it actually was. I texted him before I could talk myself out of it. Can we talk in person tonight if you're free? He answered within a minute, I'm free. I've been free the whole 3 weeks if I'm honest. I went to his apartment that evening with the cereal box still in the grocery bag, which felt stupid and also felt right, some small physical proof of what I'd finally admitted to myself. He opened the door looking like he hadn't slept properly in 3 weeks either, which made me feel less alone in how badly I'd handled the silence. I got you this, I said, holding up the bag, which was such a strange way to open a conversation that mattered this much, and he actually laughed, surprised out of the nervousness on his face. You drove here to give me cereal. I drove here because I've spent 3 weeks pretending I needed space to think, and the truth is I already knew what I thought. I was just scared to say it out loud because saying it makes it real, and real things can be lost. He set the bag down on the counter without looking away from me. So say it. I'm scared, I said, that if I do this with you and it goes wrong, I don't just lose you as someone I might love, I lose you as the person who's held me together for 11 years, and I don't know how to survive losing both versions of you at once. That's what's been stopping me. Not you, not really, that fear. I've been scared of the same thing, Callum admitted. That's why it took me 2 months to admit I couldn't marry Ezra. I kept thinking, if I say this out loud and Sam doesn't feel the same way, I don't just lose the chance at something new, I lose the friendship too, because how do you go back to normal after telling someone you love them? Do you, I asked, and my voice came out smaller than I meant it to, love me? I think I have for longer than I want to admit, he said. Longer than Ezra, if I'm being honest, which is an awful thing to say about someone I hurt, but it's true. I think some part of me has loved you since that stupid dorm meeting, and I spent years telling myself it was just friendship because you were straight when I met you. And then you weren't, and by the time that changed you were already marrying someone else, and by the time that ended you'd sworn off everything, and it felt like the timing was never going to be right, so I just kept it where it was safe. In friendship, where I couldn't lose it. I stood there in his kitchen, in the same kitchen where he'd cooked me 100 bad dinners and a handful of genuinely great ones, where he'd sat with me through the worst nights of the divorce without ever once making it about himself. And I thought about how strange it was that the person I'd sworn never to let close again was the person who'd been close the entire time, just wearing a different name for it. I don't want to lose you, I said. In any version, that's the truest thing I can tell you right now. I don't know exactly what this is supposed to look like or how fast or whether I'm actually ready the way you deserve someone to be ready. But I know I don't want to keep pretending this is just friendship because the real thing scares me. We don't have to know what it looks like tonight, Callum said. We've had 11 years of not knowing exactly what we were to each other, and somehow it worked out fine. I think we can survive not having an instruction manual for the next part too. He didn't kiss me that night, which surprised me a little until he explained why later when I asked. I didn't want our first kiss to happen while Ezra's still hurting 3 weeks out, he said. That felt disrespectful to him even if he already knew. I wanted to give it enough space that it felt like it was actually about us, not about what came right before us. So we waited, not long, a few more weeks, mostly spent doing ordinary things together that felt entirely new even though we'd done versions of them for over a decade. Grocery runs that lasted twice as long as they needed to because neither of us wanted to leave the conversation. Sitting on his couch with the specific charged quiet of two people who both know something has shifted and are choosing deliberately not to rush it. The actual kiss happened somewhere embarrassingly ordinary, his kitchen again, 6 weeks after the cereal, both of us laughing about something so unmemorable I genuinely don't recall what it was. And in the middle of the laugh he just looked at me differently and I looked back the same way, and the space between us closed like it had been waiting 11 years for permission. It wasn't cinematic. It was clumsy, actually. We both moved at the same time and there was an awkward half-second where neither of us was sure the other one meant it, and then we were sure, and it stopped being awkward and started being the kind of kiss that answers a question you've been too scared to ask out loud for over a decade. I'm not going to pretend everything after that was simple. It wasn't. There were nights I panicked quietly about how much I had ridden on this one relationship succeeding, given what it would cost me if it didn't. There were nights Callum admitted he still carried guilt about Ezra, about the shape the ending took, guilt that had nothing to do with regretting the choice, and everything to do with wishing he'd been honest sooner, before someone else got hurt in the space between his fear and his truth. We're not engaged. I want to be clear about that because this isn't a story that wraps up in a box with a ring at the end, not yet, maybe not for a long while, and I think that's honest in a way most stories like this don't let themselves be. What we have is smaller than a wedding and bigger than what we had before 11 years of history that used to be called friendship, now called something we're both still learning the shape of, one ordinary Sunday at a time. I think about the version of me who stood in that jewelry store, pointing at a ring that wasn't for him, telling himself the hollow feeling in his chest was nothing. I wish I could tell that version of me that the promise he made after his divorce, "I'm not doing this again," wasn't actually a promise worth keeping, that it was just fear dressed up as wisdom, and that sometimes the person who helps you survive the worst year of your life isn't just getting you through it. Sometimes they're waiting on the other side of it patiently for as long as it takes you to notice they never really left. I swore I'd never love again. I meant it at the time the way you mean most things you say in the middle of losing something. I just didn't know yet that the promise had a loophole built into it the whole time, sitting across from me at every dinner, laughing at my jokes, remembering the exact cereal I liked, waiting for me to stop calling it friendship long enough to call it what it actually was.